Eric Muathe, Muathe.com. Let me take a look at Bitcoin's current 4-hourly chart. And we're going to be taking a look pretty much at the crossover of the MACD. Now, what I'm going to do here is, let me do a couple things here. So I'm going to highlight the MACD crossovers over the last month or so, over the last couple of weeks, going back to the beginning of August. So there's a MACD crossover here. There is another MACD crossover here. There is another MACD crossover. And there is another MACD crossover here. Now, all of these MACDs have something. In fact, there is even another one here. Now, all these can be considered bullish MACD crossovers. The problem is we know that when the MACD is trading below zero, that tends to be less of a reliable entry. So crossover below zero, you don't get much positive move in price. Crossovers below zero on the main MACD, see what happens to price. You roll over. Crossover below zero, in fact, you roll over again. Crossover here, and let me highlight this with a different color because there's a little bit of a different feel to this one. I'll explain in a second. Crossover, you get a little bit of a better reaction. Okay, now let's try and make sense of this. Notice some differences. Number one, you have MACD rejection here when trying to move above zero. So that's one indication of running out of momentum, corresponding with a price high there. You have again uniform activity rejection around the MACD zero line, which corresponds with this top. You have rejection at the MACD zero line again, and you guessed it, you have price resistance. So some of the movement lower by Bitcoin over the last couple of weeks, frankly, are not a surprise, and we know that, right? Now, what's the difference between this current move here, this crossover, and this little uptick over the last day or so? A couple of observations. Notice here we move above zero and we are still above zero. Okay, that's one reason. Another reason is, and I talk about this in my MACD series, you have to be aware of where the MACD is trading. Here we have a MACD high, failure point, failure point, failure point. Generally speaking, your best entry tends to be where you move above the most recent failure point. Now the problem with this movement here, you can say, well, that's an entry. Come on, Eric. Here we move above a previous MACD high. Okay, that's fine. But problem is you ran into uniform action rejection. Also, if you extend this line here, this is also uniform action above the line back below it. We also have to be aware of where our MACD is trading in relation to the zero line. So of course this is a zero line. The farther away we are from the zero line, the more it means that the average price is lower. This is just pure mathematics. So the more we stay below zero on the MACD, what that means is that prices on average are resolving to lower prices. The average price is lower than the average movement is to the downside, as opposed to an increment in prices. So generally speaking, now this is just generally speaking, when the MACD is below 0, it just means prices are trading with a heavy slant to the downside. Alright, now let's take a lesson from the previous successful swing trade on the same chart. And of course, this is for Bitcoin 4 hourly. Now you'll notice there's a decent gain in price here, which took Bitcoin from, we can call this to be around the 630 price level to around the highs here of 850, give or take. And that was for a good gain of about, let's call it 30% plus, 30% gain in a couple of weeks. Okay, all right. In fact, we can say week number 1, number 2, number 3. It's about 4 weeks maximum to gain 30%. So a good move from this level to that level. So this was a successful swing trade. Okay, let's take a look at the MACDs. Now you'll notice we need one of the MACDs to be reclaiming back about the 0 line. And you can see it clears MACD highs here and here. Let me do that again. So you want the nearest MACD failure to go above 0 as close to 0 as possible. So once it starts moving above this level, there's a change in momentum. Your average price now wants to be to the upside as opposed to your average price being lower. Now while this is taking place, so we're talking about this time period here, there's the other MACD, and it is also moving above this failure point, this high. Okay. Now, of course, in terms of price, this is where there was a reaction and prices took off on this 4 hourly chart. Now, this time period corresponds with a couple of momentum generating moments. Here, you move above RSI 50. Here, you clear this MACD high. You also have a crossover above 0. Bullish crossovers above 0 tend to be more reliable. As a case in point, crossover above 0 tends to be more reliable. Okay? You also have in that time period here, when the RSI is above 50, MACDs are moving above that range. We also have the main MACD moving above 0 for the first time in a while. So you can see that this movement in price was actually, from a technical standpoint, already in place during this move of the MACD, this MACD move, or this MACD move. So the move in price, we can see, was not a surprise. In fact, if you go back to my video around that time, in fact, I think I recorded the video somewhere here. I could see this taking place just based on what the MACD was doing. By the way, before I forget, if you take a look at the orange line here, this orange line, you might notice visually, see whether I can get this, it is almost uniform action below the line and back above it. So this uniform action below the line and back above it with uniform action also tends to be a sign of intent of going back to your previous trend. So I hope you can see that this period, in my opinion, the orange line or the signal line, is very uniform, or close to being uniform as possible. And we know that whenever we observe uniform action, it tends to suggest that the market is playing tricks and that ultimately it actually is looking to go higher. Here we have the MACDs going below zero, back above it. It's not the best uniform action, but at least we can say you try to go above zero. There was rejection ultimately for this entry point somewhere here. I think it's somewhere here. Now, one thing I should point out here is, let's take a look at the current setup. Some observations. Now, we know that we broke down here, and based on our uniformity principle, for Bitcoin to have a sustained push to the upside, or at least for a strong swing trade, it would need to clear this level. We haven't reached that level on the RSI, on the 4-hourly at least. So really, we question any upside move as of right now. Now, we know there was a secondary break. The break right here of these highs. And they have some relevance right now in the current market, as Bitcoin is coming again to test this level. Now, we know that this was a rejection point. Coinciding with that move, uniform activity above the line, back below it, here. Okay. It is also this line here, this line, happens to be around the RSI 50. So the last thing the bulls in the cryptos want to see is Bitcoin dropping back below 50. And even this drop here would be uniform action if it drops. In other words, it would be similar to scratch that. My tool won't work. Alright. Assume this is the line. Forget about the black line. Assuming this line here is this line. The last things the crypto bulls want to see is Bitcoin doing a number like this. Because this would be uniform action above 50, back below it. Okay, so that's something I'm watching. Also, the last thing the bulls in cryptos want to see in the short term is this rolling over back below zero with uniform action. The last thing crypto bulls want to see is the main MACD being rejected around the MACD 0 line. That would suggest a test of these lows, if not taking out the lows. So in other words, if the bulls are to see any appreciation in the Bitcoin prices in the short term, the RSI would have to move higher. MACD would have to stay above zero on both MACD timeframes. Now, before I leave this 4-hourly chart, let's take a look at, there's a break right there in price, which actually corresponds with this break on the 4-hourly RSI. And I believe right now also this is where we are forming this most recent double top on BTC. And of course the implications are straightforward. As long as you are unable to move above the line, the more you drop below RSI 50, the more you still caught up within part of this drop. In other words, this movement lower still continues as long as BTC is unable to clear this red line. Okay. Now, if I was to take a quick look at the daily, it doesn't look that bad, and I discussed that the other day. we can see from the daily, there's been some type of an improvement. It's not the biggest, strongest improvement, but at least there is RSI 30.9 support. Which has stopped the recent slide here. Now you can see the challenge here, in my opinion. Let me pull out a little bit so we can zoom in. Alright, so the challenge in my opinion, let me remove that, can be seen. In my opinion, the challenge is the fact that we have both MACDs trading below zero. That's not where you get momentum. We've already established that. So on the dailies, no type of recovery. Compare that to this period here, where the MACDs, you have this movement above a previous MACD failure point. You clear this level. You also move above zero at the same time. It is also coincides with a MACD uniform activity recovery back above zero. So this movement for a swing trade was more successful, even on the daily chart, because the MACDs were moving above zero at the same time here. Right now, just based on the MACD reading on the daily, there is no momentum yet. Momentum would have to come with one or both of the MACDs, at the very least, trading above the MACD zero line. It doesn't mean that we have to drop below current lows here. It just means that we might have to go into a sideways consolidation, just like we did here, in preparation for a momentum move higher. And in this particular case, this was the one that started the swing trade to the upside. So the dailies don't have it, in my opinion, for a move higher. Now, I can also argue here on the RSI, on the daily, that we are coming to a level where it's going to have to decide whether it has the strength or not. And this simple way of looking at it is this line here, which gave us the recent break. Of that level is now the next line to be tested. Should be something like that. So this would have to be clear to the upside before BTC can have a chance of moving higher. So all told, yes, hour to hour, day to day, there can be movements to the upside. But generally speaking, based on the 4 hourly and also based on the daily chart, it's going to take a lot of work for BTC to move above the current range. And I believe it also gave us good lessons about how to use the MACDs. So there you have it. Food for thought. Otherwise, this is Eric Muathe, Muathe.com. As always, good luck, peace, and blessings. E-A-C-S.